Okay. It's still going up, Mike, but we'll get started. You ready?
Yep, now there's a paper trail.
All right. Thank you all. Welcome Friday in what month are we in? February already? To the latest webinar series. This month, we're talking about technical graphics with Mr. Mike Pauk. He's based here in Denver, where I am. We were talking about it yesterday. We've known each other, what did we say, 10 years, Mike? Hired him as a contractor.
I think it's 11 now.
Oh, goodness gracious. That means we're getting old. So Mike is going to talk us about technical graphics today. But before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. Pretty standard, no new rules. Obviously, keep yourself on mute unless you have a question. If you do have a question, use the chat feature, handy chat feature here in Zoom. I also will be monitoring that. Questions, put them in the chat, or and if there's one that's specific to what Mike is talking about, and if you want to come off of mute, you can do that. Otherwise, I will ask it for you. Otherwise, we'll save it to the end. I'm giving Mike about 30 minutes to go do his spiel, talk about technical graphics. We should be done early, depending on how many questions we get. That's always the big wild card these days. What else? The questions that you asked during the registration period, those Mike and I have gone over and we've talked about those. So he has incorporated those into his presentation, but I am sure all of you will have more. So feel free to ask those as well. The recording will be sent out later this afternoon. We'll get you a link to that along with, the link. And then any other housekeeping items, Mike, that I need to go over before we do introductions?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. A little bit about me, Angie Wolfe, for those who don't know me. I'm the founder, owner, proposal manager, trainer, wear multiple hats, probably like all of you. For Ideas at Dawn, we are a marketing consulting firm that helps civil engineering and civil construction firms with their proposals processes to help them win more work without adding on more payroll. Mike and I have known each other about 11 years. Hired him as a contractor, help with technical graphics, which is his expertise. He's a designer, 3D artist, leader, builder, collaborator, started his consulting firm less than a year ago, right, Mike? It hasn't been that long, right? 6 months? No,
it's like a year on the dot.
Cool, year on the dot. He brings 10 years of experience, has a master's in architecture, so and does everything from proposal graphics to presentations, dispute resolutions, build work stuff, anything related to graphics layout. But his specialty to me is his technical graphic wizardry for sure. So as we get started talking about graphics, we all know the importance of communicating content and graphics using communicating content via graphics, and the importance of using that to help our clients and public and whomever we're communicating with to understand our story and our solution and why we're the best team. So whether that's early in the phase of putting them on the cover to putting in a proposal or SOQ to incorporating into an interview and carrying that on to building the work, these graphics are very important in communicating that. And I think our clients, which Mike will talk about later, are getting more savvy about it. They're wanting more of these technical graphics and as well. And the term Mike will go over and what he and I and what I talk about when it comes to technical graphics and what those actually mean or could mean, from simple to very complex. So as we get started, I will be communicating you all with the chat. if you have any questions about graphics. But as we get started and before Mike kicks off, put in the chat what you're most excited about learning from Mike today and what you hope to learn. And then we'll make sure that hopefully we cover that with you. And then anything else, Mike, before I hand it over to you?
No, actually, I think you just gave my whole talk, so we can just.
Congratulations, all you have 53 minutes back of your day. No, just kidding. Mike has all the pictures and the graphics and more than just my face. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. I will mute myself for now, and then it is all you. If you want to share your screen.
Share here. Let's go to full screen.
Oh.
Let's try.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
You're good, Mike. All yours.
Thank you, Angie. I think Angie already introduced myself pretty well. My name is Michael Pauk. I am a Colorado native. I've grown up here, which if you've grown up here, you spent your whole life snowboarding. But since I spent my whole life snowboarding, my knees don't work very well any longer. So now I just kayak and raise chickens. Not really bragging about the chickens. I'm just warning the group that they're like 5 feet away. So if you hear chickens, that's coming from me. As Angie already mentioned, I come from an architecture background from a university standpoint, where I got my BA here in Colorado in environmental design. So that touches a little bit more on AEC, where it's kind of comprehensive from city planning to infrastructure, et cetera, to getting my master's in architecture. During this time, I was actually contracting, as Angie mentioned, doing 3D graphics, 2D graphics from a technical standpoint. I was doing things like pop-up modeling for Adidas and stuff in the commercial sector. But it was during this time that I met Angie, who was working for Qt at the time, and she brought me onto this team of 4 graphic designers. And we were taking on the challenge of developing a group to support technical proposals. These were design builds, P3s, CMGCs, the whole gambit in infrastructure space. And we needed to build a library of material to go out and sell this stuff. And that ultimately grew to about a 16 to 20 person team. Usually it kind of fluctuated a little bit, but pretty healthy for, I would say, almost 10 years we were running this group. It's still going. But just, that's a little bit of my background. And this time, like I said, last year, Angie reached out to me and I started contracting with her. And she asked me here to talk today, which I'm excited to do. And we're going to focus on graphics and tech viz. But I think most of you know what graphic design is. So I'm going to focus on technical visualization, or as we came to call it, tech viz. And in my mind, that's really focused on 2D, 3D, and 4D visualizations of design and construction, which I think separates this stuff apart from what your proposal group graphic designer typically does in terms of layouts and infographics, org charts, that sort of stuff. This is more about the technical representation of the AEC space. And I'm going to try and not get too nerdy about the technical stuff and keep it focused on proposals and presentations and marketing as per this group. So where these ideas started out, where we started selling this internally, was really what I have come to call garnish on a proposal. We were making these really slick, beautiful representations of the finished design, the finished product of what the proposal was selling. And by garnish, I mean we were really just putting it on covers, tabs, decorating, making the piece that we were submitting beautiful with the product that we're selling. But that only got us so far in justification of having tech viz people on staff. So we started to branch out and expand our scope to where we weren't just doing the garnish on covers and tabs and logos and things like that, using 3D to really give identity to projects. But we started to use it as communication tools in proposals and interviews and dispute resolution, where we're maximizing the use of technical graphics within the proposal. And this got more sophisticated over time, where we're starting to use this stuff in executive summaries with really like higher class, higher end technical drawings, as opposed to submitting your chicken scratch engineered drawings that we all see every day. Taking that a step further, we started using this tool not just as the communication of design, but also presenting options, exploring the ability to show a client that our design teams are flexible in studying projects and coming up with solutions for the client. So here we were showing multiple design solutions for the same challenge of building this path in a really super difficult building space, a really small footprint between this cliff and a river, and showing the client what that looks like in the real world. And it's not always, it doesn't always have to be super complex and big. I like to say that there's no project too big, no project too small for tech viz. If we just want to go in and show the client that we are minimizing environmental impacts on a hillside for a bike path. And then all the way to huge, heavy civil working interchanges in dense urban areas. So this whole process is super scalable. And we also started building things in 4D. This one's not 4D, but we started building animations where we can show traffic moving, what it's like to move through these finished corridors. And I apologize if video is a little choppy over Zoom, because there's a few more. So all I've really shown you so far has to do with design, and where we started to maximize our team even further, especially in the like CMGC space and the design build space, is the construction aspect, which gets us into 4D animations of how projects are built out, which requires a mindset that's super in line with your SMEs on the design side and the estimating side to really match these things up with not just the schedule for all intents and purposes, but also to show and bring out the solutions in the schedule that we can take and sell to the client. And pieces like this were used in interviews and one-on-ones with the client to really communicate our solutions. So again, this graphic was showing TechViz being used to show design solutions, but in the same breath, we can use that same material to show how things are built, not using a 4D animation, but also using them in a proposal in a print media. So when I say this stuff is scalable, we also consult on what we can use, what we can do, and what we can achieve in the space lab for us. We also started building models to demonstrate design components and constructability, showing pieces of projects that don't necessarily need to be in a real environment. We're just demonstrating to the client that we know how to build this, we know what components go in there, and we can walk them through every step of the job. And that builds confidence in our design teams. It helps our engineers and estimators, et cetera, really walk into an interview with confidence and have the ammunition to really sell the project. So in terms of this group, I think there are a few people on the list I saw that are graphic designers like myself, but there's also a lot of content creators, probably looking at technical proposals. So I wanted to kind of summarize what we look for when we go in and essentially audit a project and identify places where we can use TechViz to enhance that submission. So on the design side, I won't get too much into these, but we're talking about, again, showing off the finished delivered project, selling project enhancements, demonstrating components and schematics and aesthetics. We started seeing about 5 or 6 years ago, more and more aesthetics sections showing up in these heavy civil design build proposals. So we started really leaning on aesthetics there, and environmental impacts are huge. From the construction side, we start talking about delivery means and methods. Angie and I just worked on this enormous, crazy CMGC project where the win or lose on the project was demonstrating that we knew how to build this in really complex ways. So we were able to add value there. Another huge thing is phasing an MOT. When we first started out, we saw a lot of phasing plans that were just bullets. Step by step, this is how we're building the job. These are the ramps that are closed in Word form. And we were able to add tons of value there. Constructability is huge, schedule is huge, and all of this stems back to project management and selling to the client that our team knows how to build the job, and we can show them the job being built using graphics. Just kind of a simple example of how this gets used in a proposal. This is an executive summary, where here you see more of what your typical graphic designer is doing, building layouts and infographics, selling the team. And then the center spread, we have the heavy text stuff with sort of a high level view of the enhancements on the job. And this can be really dense to read. So it takes a really skilled team in collaboration between your content makers and your TechViz people to really finesse this type of graphic so it's not overbearing and is legible. But then I always like to give the reader a little bit of a break in terms of content from the heavy TechViz stuff to go back to what are your selling points, what's your messages. And this spread was then the transition into the tech proposal where we get back into tech graphics. So I also kind of pride myself in having been working in technical proposals for 10 years and know what's needed. We know how much space is needed for the write-up and how dense things can be and how we can work with the space of the print media, which is lately becoming more of a PDF digital submission, but for all intents and purposes, the space utilization is the same. And I could talk for hours on end on how to use these in a graphic. I'm seeing what size font for this. Yeah, I don't remember. Most of the time we have a 11 or 12 point font for body text, sometimes as low as 9 on the graphics. Sorry, I just got into that question. Where was
Oh,
I?
all good there, Mike.
Okay, so those are examples of the graphics that I think really add enhancements to proposals. And Angie and I also wanted to talk a little bit about how these things get made. So just I before I go into this, I want to say that I don't represent any of these companies or the software. I'm not selling any software. I buy this software. From a 3D standpoint, Autodesk is still king and probably will be for a long time. You've probably written sections about CAD and Revit and BIM technology. A lot of that lives in the Autodesk suite, where CAD is being used to design a lot of horizontal and schematic type projects. Revit is more your BIM, which by BIM I mean building information modeling. This is building a model that has information down to what walls are made out of, what the foundation is made out of, how much rebar is in the foundations. So that can get very dense and very heavy. And then Civil 3D is similar for civil work. Need to move this little box full of all your names so I can read this. From the finishing point of view, from the marketing side, building these graphics into proposals and presentations, it's all about the Adobe suite too. Our tech viz guys worked almost every day in Illustrator and Photoshop, and the video stuff gets produced in After Effects and Premiere. So I have those on there. Bentley is sort of a twin to Autodesk, where they have a lot of this BIM modeling information. Without getting too much in detail, 4D Synchro we use a lot. It's just simply, not simply, but you're taking your BIM model from Revit or Civil 3D and tying it to a schedule so you can see it being built in 4D. I'll skip those for now, but there are also all what I call oddballs in the industry. I like using Rhinoceros. It's really good, powerful 3D software that can consume data from everything from Autodesk and Bentley. It can take stuff from Illustrator. So it's sort of like the funnel of my workflow. I bring everything into Rhino to polish and finish things. Lumion is a rendering and animation building software. It kind of works a little bit more like a video game than the rest of these. I don't know if anybody's familiar with like The Sims, where you can build your walls and it's really user-friendly. So it's a really quick way to develop presentable material really quickly. And then everybody knows SketchUp. It's been around forever. It used to be owned by Google, but now it's Trimble. So if you're looking at licensing for any of these, I kind of split them up in here the way that your IT manager would look at them in terms of having access to these different software tools. I also built it this way to show you how intense a workflow can be doing tech viz. I get these questions a lot, like on some of the big heavy civil, big freeway interchange projects. We're getting 3D data that's been built by a designer in Civil 3D. I pull that into Rhino to polish and finish, then take it into Lumion to animate and export video. But to do that, I need Illustrator and Photoshop to build things like the brick material to make the bridge abutments look like they're made out of brick, and the striping that goes on the pavement, stuff like that. Really intense kind of workflow there. And then that gets exported out into After Effects, where we polish a video for an interview. So already you're seeing that I'm using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 programs from 1, 2, 3, 4 different software suites. So that part of my job working in a proposal group was educating the IT department and selling the need for this type of firepower. Recently, I worked on some vertical construction. I know there's some architectural background people in the meeting where we're taking BIM information from vertical construction. Again, I'm bringing it into Rhino. And this time I saw the use case to bring it into 3ds Max, which, if you're not familiar with it, the best way to describe it is it's kind of more based on 3D animation, where you see things like Pixar movies and stuff like that, where you're animating characters. But it's an extremely powerful piece of software. It's definitely becoming more part of my workflow over like Lumion and SketchUp to build out some of these pieces. And again, you're using the Adobe suite to provide materials to dress things up. But since 3ds Max handles its own animation, I don't need After Effects anymore. I can just take it into Premiere to polish. And again, this is a very high power, crazy workflow on a huge job. But I wanted to show a project I just worked with Angie on, where it was as simple as taking 3D information out of Navisworks, touching up the color of material, bringing it into Illustrator to annotate, and then it was beautified and ready to go in a proposal. So TechViz isn't always about these heavy hitter, just crazy workflows to get that end product. We can manage it down to be as efficient as possible. I saw a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I don't know how to pull them.
Okay, I'll ask you.
Right.
When using Illustrator, do you link to the native CAD file and then develop it further in Illustrator? And then how often, oh, also, I often have to use a very old version of CAD to get the work, to get it to work with the current version of Illustrator.
Yeah.
And this is Brittany.
Yes, that's a great question. And the answer is sometimes. A big thing with having a TechViz team was finding people with a mindset of flexibility, because we were working with designers that were building 3D and 2D assets in a number of different softwares, whether it's CAD or OpenRoads, which used to be Inroads. But to answer the question, yes, I do bring line work from CAD into Illustrator. And more to your point, it is tricky sometimes getting them to talk to each other, where you get the line work that you want and not just like a scramble of different page views and things like that. And it comes down to what iteration of CAD is being used and what iteration of Illustrator you're being used. So oftentimes this is a little bit of trial and error. And without looking exactly at the iterations that you're using, it's kind of hard to answer it directly. But yes, those types of problems occur frequently. I hope that answers something.
Did that work, Brittany? Let us know in the chat if it, yeah, no, it is not just you, Brittany. there's there's probably should be a support group for folks working with technical graphics because
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of why I wanted to use this slide is sometimes your workflow changes based on, it's sort of like the way water flows downhill. Like you're almost governed by how these different software suites talk to each other and what is the easiest path to get to the end goal of what you're trying to achieve. Was there another one, or is that it?
that was it right now, Mike. Are you talking 2D graphics? You do, don't you? Or no?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I think that workflow we just talked about has a lot to do with those 2D graphics that I've shown,
Yeah.
where it's bringing CAD into Illustrator to clean up and make it readable for a lay person to understand these technical drawings. Let me hop back.
Yeah, what is your advice there, Mike, on taking these CAD files and creating 2D graphics, whether it's technical graphics, even org charts, process graphics, and this was Hunter and I think Amy's question as well, but still making sure that people can understand them, they're clear, do you have any thoughts there on what to keep, what not to keep on these 2D visualizations?
Yeah. First thing I always say is the delete key is your best friend. Because the way that drawing design and schematics from the engineering side is you're drawing for measurements and quantities. And for instance, a graphic like this, that is not what we are demonstrating. So 90% of what I see in a engineering document or a drawing set isn't needed for the space of proposals, selling design ideas. So delete key is your best friend. I use this analogy from actually Jack White from the White Stripes was talking about music and how he used to work as an upholsterer's apprentice. And one of his main jobs was stapling upholstery in place so the upholsterer could work with it. And he would contemplate how many staples were necessary for the upholsterer to do his job. And he always tried to use as few as possible. So he'd get a chair down to 3 staples, 2 on either end and 1 in the middle to hold the slack. And that is what it took to do the job. So I'm always trying to get a drawing like this down to those 3 staples. And oftentimes the SME is asking me to add things back, which is a healthy process in my mind of getting to the end, because these things are highly collaborative between your proposal people, your designer, and your graphics guy. So my advice is always bring it down to as simple a diagram as you can. Negotiate back up to what your SME wants to show. And then you end up with something really nice and clean like this one.
Hey, Mike, Brittany asked a question for this particular graphic.
Yep.
Can you walk us through your process on how this one was created and in general, kind of what that workflow looked like, and then also what programs you used to create it?
Okay, yeah. So I think you can zoom in PowerPoint. Let's try this.
Yeah, there it goes.
So essentially what came through out of the CAD file were the right-of-way limits, which are these white lines, striping and pavement edges. This is basically a pavement project. And then tons of detail in terms of the arc of these curves, distances, mile markers, the whole 9 yards in terms of measurements. So I took out everything that wasn't the right of way, which I think is always really important because it establishes your, I'm always big on environmental impacts. It establishes the maximum footprint of a project. And if you can show that what you're building is much smaller than that maximum imprint, it makes your design team look really smart, like they are minimizing impacts. So I took all that line work into Illustrator, got rid of all the measurements, things like that, and just using the pavement edge lines, joining them all together in Illustrator, so then you can make a compound shape, which is this orange, to demonstrate what is being built in this phase. And then I paint those without getting into tremendous amount of detail. Sometimes I add a little bit, like there's a tiny bit of drop shadow in there to make it pop a little bit. I'm all about isolating one color to draw the eye. And you can see I'm using the same color in two different ways, with a dark background or using the colors, the lighter background, where I want you to read the colored stuff first, the secondary color next, and the rest of the information is additive. Part of this workflow too is pulling satellite imagery. Google Earth is king, but sometimes you can get photography elsewhere from like GIS stuff. I've pulled stuff from different states' parks and rec, government entities, stuff like that. Sometimes you have to get creative to find a good image like this.
And even a current one, right, Mike? I mean, sometimes depending on where your project is at, Google's satellites haven't updated their imagery.
Yeah, and there's some tricks to that. Sometimes you can just, it's as simple as checking Bing, and because Bing uses different satellite imagery. Trying to think of what else I can say to that. Sometimes you don't want the most current because stuff's been demoed or other projects are taking place. So it's always a little bit of a finesse finding the right background.
Okay. Any other questions before Mike goes back to? And then Veronica, we'll address your question at the end about org charts. We haven't talked about any. So I'll see what Mike can show us here. Make him scramble a little.
I can scramble.
Yeah.
Angie had this question for me a couple days ago about what are the skill sets, or what type of person do you need for working on stuff like this? And I used to think of what is the brain like of a tech viz designer, because I used to be the guy that interviewed and hired our tech viz designers. So short of their resume asking for what is their personal bag of tricks, because this isn't the same for everybody. Some people just do stuff in SketchUp and don't know how to use these. But the number one thing in my mind is having a technical background. Like we both mentioned, I came up through architecture, which at the time we were still hand drawing and drafting. It was before Revit kind of took over the industry. Having that technical background is huge. A lot of the people that I hired to work in this kind of space either had architecture, engineering backgrounds, hired some people out of industrial design schools, which industrial designers have a really good idea of how things get made from a micro perspective versus in the AEC industry, especially with proposals, we're really used to like a macro kind of mindset. What's the 3,000 foot view of things? So I found those types of people to be really excellent in this space. The thing in my mind that separates a tech viz designer from your engineer is the marketing side, which I think most people on this call, that marketing dot is most of their brain. For me, it's a little bit of it, but you need that because a huge part of tech viz is really just translating the language of engineers into something that's marketable. This one is huge for me, is a real proficiency. I interviewed tons of people that would say they used SketchUp a few times, so they knew how to do 3D, which will cut it if you're doing a mock-up of a chair or a kitchen, something like that. But when it comes to these big AEC projects, we're setting people up to fail because they couldn't handle the intensity of this huge bag of tricks that's necessary to get the job done. And the last thing is just straight creativity. Again, it's not just creativity in the way we think of graphic designers, of being able to create something out of nothing. It's also problem solving and solutions driven kind of creativity to get that kind of crummy CAD file to work in a presentation. So I think that's it in a nutshell. I think asking more than that out of a human being is too much. I barely have enough room for my chickens after that. I don't know if you can hear them, one squawking at me. But yeah, this is a very unique type of person, and it was admittedly a challenge to hire for, but they're out there. And they love what they do, so it's always exciting to find one.
Mike, related to that, which of those, what do you have, 4 components? Which one's most important? I had my opinion, but I'd like to hear yours.
I drew that little infographic like 3 times.
Yeah.
Making marketing the big bubble, and then creative the big bubble, but I always came back to the technical background. Because at the end of the day, a tech viz designer is really sort of a translator between 2 worlds, and that's between the technical world and the marketing world. And the marketing side is necessary to get these types of graphics across the finish line, but you're not going to get anywhere without a technical background first. But I'd like to hear your thought.
No, that was exactly my thought as well, Mike, in that if someone has a technical background, it makes the proposal managers and the proposal team's life, to me, easier, because you don't have to explain everything, and you personally don't have to understand everything as well as a proposal person, because they know more than you from a technical perspective. and they can interpret it and know what to do, versus having the proposal manager interpret it from a design person or construction person to a graphic person. That translation doesn't have to occur through the proposal person.
Yeah, and to kind of lean on my background at Kiewit, this 16-person group, sometimes 18, where I hired a lot of them myself. Most of these are like your traditional graphic designer. And this 4 on the left side is that group of architects, industrial designer type people. And we made a lot of attempts to create like a career path for the more traditional graphic designers to start moving towards this tech viz stuff. And the only ones that really could even find any minute bit of success there had some kind of technical background. Because it really takes the mindset and it takes the experience, frankly, to get you there.
Okay. We have a few more questions, Mike. So why don't you finish up, and then we'll finish up with a few questions.
Yeah. Really only had one more point I wanted to make. And I tried making this kind of spooky intro to it because it's level of effort, which again, my role at Kiewit was not just selling the stuff, but negotiating with the proposal management and the proposal directors that are in charge of LOE. And LOE isn't just hours, it's also cost. And a lot of people have sticker shock to me showing them something like this, which this is probably a 500-hour job right here, like a 2-quarter, one designer attached full-time through the duration of the pursuit. But I always want to make the point that this stuff is scalable. It doesn't have to be the big giant endeavor. I pride myself in being able to find a solution within the constraints of the project and the pursuit, where it can be, if we can achieve the goal with a few maps like this, let's do it. If we can achieve the goal with some very lightly detailed models that express what the team is trying to communicate, we don't need all the glitz and glam of moving cars and animation and stuff like that. So I always say that good tech viz is scalable. It's also collaborative, and the collaboration comes down from everything to how the project is achieved, but also how much time it's going to take. That's a discussion, and it's a team effort. But last, I always say great tech viz is exciting. And I think I think Angie can attest to that on some recent pursuits where we've seen our engineers kind of light up and in an interview environment have that much more energy and confidence in talking about what they're trying to sell. And at the end of the day, the exciting part is what allowed us to build such a big team and work so comprehensively in the infrastructure space. So lastly, I think Angie brought this up at the start, is that the state of the industry right now is absolutely in tune with everything that we've just discussed. And to use a recent project, our owners are beginning to be more and more savvy and more fluent in the languages of TechViz, where right now, if you go to the Colorado Department of Transportation's website, it's sort of tricky to find, but there's a link to a virtual public engagement space, which if you asked me 5 years ago if a DOT would be using this kind of tech, I would have laughed. I still kind of laugh at it because it looks like this. You get met by this receptionist in a 3D space that teaches you how to move around this virtual space, sort of like an art gallery that you can click through on their website. And it has stuff like PI pieces, infographics, background information on the corridor. But I'd like to point out that all this stuff in the middle is TechViz. This whole giant wall that you can click on and look at is the exact kind of stuff that we were just talking about, where it's sophisticated, clear, and presentable 2D diagrams of what the project is, paired with 3D to really speak not just between engineers and engineers, which a lot of the times that's what proposal work is, but this is public facing. And they have 3D videos in there that are virtually the same thing that we were doing 5 years ago on the Get Work side. So this stuff is becoming the language of our clients, essentially, that we're selling to. And I told Angie this the other day, one of the best ways to talk about TechViz is if your client, if the owner is already speaking this language, you need to be speaking it back to them. Because that panel that your interview team is talking to has seen this PI piece that CDOT has already paid for and built. So if you can sell your idea of how this project's built using the same language that they are, you have that much clear and presentable of a sell. So yeah, that was sort of my last deal. I don't know if this kind of strange looking receptionist really is the future. I think it's got a long way to go to become more sophisticated. We've all seen what like Facebook is trying to do with the metaverse, pretty similar to this. I think some of it has traction, some of it doesn't. But what for sure does is this type of communication. Yeah, and with that, we can jump back and talk about some of these questions.
Perfect. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes, Mike, before 1. So we'll get through most of them. And then so if you have questions for Mike, first reach out to him, phone or email. He does respond. And then his website's there as well, which has some more of this portfolio. So before I unshare that and go back to Mike's beautiful face, we'll do some questions here. And I guess the one common question, talking about what programs to learn as a starting point, what education training do you recommend for those with a technical background considering a career change? What does that look like, Mike?
I'm going to go back to the bag of tricks slide.
Okay.
And I apologize, I have to animate everything. I love animating, so I got to click through this again. So what I say to that, especially if it's sort of a marketing type person. A lot of people have the creative suite in their bag of tricks already, where they're proficient in not just Illustrator and Photoshop, but also InDesign. A lot of these other programs will be a learning curve, but if you have that Adobe background, you understand how the software is trying to think. And that said, I think the most beginner-friendly and user-friendly one of these to start moving specifically towards 3D stuff is SketchUp. Just because it's the most widely used for amateur artists. And what that unlocks for you is a whole wealth of training material and tips and tricks on the internet ready at your fingertips. There's miles and miles of content on YouTube and elsewhere about SketchUp and how to do things in it. And that will get you going. Whereas like Rhino, which I use, is a little bit more niche. And when I come across a problem in Rhino, there is a pretty good chance that I can't find anyone on the internet that has solved it. And that's part of where I mentioned the creativity part of the brain of a tech viz, that some of it is problem solving because we are at the like cutting edge of using this kind of stuff. Yeah, SketchUp's great for that. 3ds Max is pretty similar, where there's a whole wealth of information out there. Again, I mentioned that like 3D animators that build like big studio animations like Pixar and Disney, and a lot of the video game world uses 3ds Max. There's a few others on here that I could share offline. There's some new things popping up that are more user friendly, but they'll at least get you some exposure to some of this stuff to see if that's really what you want to do and pursue.
Perfect. Mike, I'll wrap it up. And then for those that want to stick around, there's a few more questions. So first off, thank you, Mike, for all of this, introducing some of us to TechViz and others showing what we can do and what's in your bag of tricks. Reach Mike via his email or cell phone. And then next month, we are going to be hosting talking about cover letters and executive summaries. So we'll continue with, thank you, David. We'll continue with some of the other questions, but if you have to jet to another meeting or want to take the rest of Friday off, thank you for attending. And then we'll continue with a few more questions. Feel free to keep putting them in the chat. Mike, do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. One question that came up, or actually two more for sure. How do you get our either proposal managers or project managers to understand how much time and effort it takes to create good quality graphics? So are there, let's just start with 2D graphics and that LOE required to make some of those ones that you were showing, and that sometimes the people are having to do it all, right? They have to do the writing, the editing, the layout, the graphics, the management, the whole piece. So sure. Do you have advice on kind of which ones provide the most value, how to pick and choose which graphics are best to put some effort in, and what effort does that look like to get the most bang for the buck?
Where to start? So we had, so first thing I'll say to that is a best practice that we developed early at Qt, and Angie can attest to this, was when I first started, your graphic designer was really just a inbox of graphics requests, and you turn it around and give it back to the team. And there wasn't a lot of collaboration or interfacing between the team as a whole, or even an understanding of what the end goal was or what the total, I guess, product that the team was looking for was. So I always say, get your creatives in the room early, have them, and you mentioned that there's a lot of people out there working in this space that are the content developers from cradle to grave, which is great, because to have a discussion about LOE and what is going to be the solution for your pursuit, that person needs to understand at a comprehensive level what the end goal is. So if you're wearing multiple hats, that's great. You already have that comprehensive understanding, and it has to do with how much space is allotted in the submission or presentation or whatever piece it is you're working on. So we always start by essentially auditing the concept at like sort of the gestation of the proposal, when you're doing outlining and storyboarding. Storyboarding is a great time to have this conversation about what kind of graphics we can pull out of the content and how we can deliver it. And that goes back to this slide of looking for these types of topics in your content that can be brought out visually. That said, the LOE conversation, I like to use the term measured mile. We use that term a lot in dispute resolution, where we say, but for any problems, this type of thing takes this long to deliver. And without getting into like a ton of detail on this, I do have what I call that measured mile for different types of graphics like this, where a graphic like this maybe takes 10 hours with another 5 tacked on for iterations and collaboration, where this one's probably a 40 to 60 to, this one's probably also kind of 40 to 60 to, again, that 600-hour effort. And so it's good to sort of catalog and understand how much time goes into each iteration of these. And that changes per group, because some groups collaborate differently than others. Angie and I have 10 years worth of trust, where she can say, I need this, and I know what she wants, and there's not a lot of back and forth, but that's not true for every working relationship. What else can I say about that? A good strategy that we found for, not to use the term upselling, but to really get the ball rolling on these kind of more intense LOE pieces, is that if you're going to put the effort into putting these together, you want to maximize the use of them. And if you're putting together a good piece of tech viz, it's very easy to maximize. What I mean by that is what you use in the proposal can also be used in the interview. And our tech viz team separated itself from the 2D content team in that the TechViz stuff doesn't end at award, because 99.999% of the time, the project that you submitted on the proposal changes before the first shovel gets in the ground. And the TechViz team stays attached to that project through the design phase. And I guess I'm speaking mostly towards design build and P3 stuff right now, and then past, once construction starts, we still use these pieces as PI, and we help with change orders. And I've said it a few times, like dispute resolution when design changes or there are project impacts. We can use these graphics to demonstrate how that impact affected the design or the constructability of a job. So it's all about maximizing the time that it took to put into these. Because sometimes if really it's just in the cards that this is just going to be a piece on a page in a proposal, maybe it's not worth putting 800 hours into it. Maybe it's a 40-hour effort kind of a thing. So that's part of the
or let's keep it 2D with an interesting background or cleaned up background.
Yep.
Exactly. Sort of related to that, Mike, with the industry trending towards digital submissions, what's the way to keep these files at a lower size? Because these graphics that you're creating, 3D graphics, and some of them can get pretty big. Any tips and tricks there?
Yeah. Yeah, so the simple answer to that is it's all about, in my mind, the sort of funnel at the end. That I like to keep the graphic content as crisp and clean as possible right up till the very end. Because when you're producing that final PDF, there are tools that Adobe has to flatten graphics, to sort of universally level down all of your graphics to a certain PPI, that sort of thing. And well, I guess that is my strategy. I was going to be honest. If I'm working in InDesign and Illustrator, I like to keep the link between InDesign and Illustrator to the raw file, so that we're not degrading the fidelity of graphics through the process of iteration.
Of saving it to a different file type.
Yeah, because I don't know if you remember on ORB so many years ago that it used to be a best practice using like JPEGs in a Word document, but every time you save a Word document with a JPEG, you lose fidelity on that JPEG. So my workflow is to prevent any fidelity loss until you are making that PDF at the end of the day. And frankly, it really helps to do some trial runs on the document before the day, so that you understand what kind of scaling down of graphics you can maximize. Meaning, if you're only allowed a 20 megabyte submission, and if you are saving raw, you're at 30. Like, what's the maximum fidelity you can get while still getting underneath that 20?
Right. Okay. So use Adobe's file compression tools.
There you go.
Okay. One more question for you, Mike.
Yep.
Tips and suggestions on making our basic graphics. So org charts, infographics, that sort of thing. More visually interesting without affecting the file size.
I would say color and typography. That gets back to sort of my color theories on how to make graphics pop. That I didn't put any org charts in here, but I built these flags pretty similar to how I built an org chart, where I am minimizing noise to the pieces that pop because of their color and typography. Like when I say typography, I mean like where I have font changes and things like that.
Right.
And especially recently, I've been leaning on that very hard with digital submissions to really enhance how you read a graphic and how interesting it is.
Okay, I think we have one question left. If anybody has any question and wants to come off mute and ask Mike, feel free to do so. He doesn't bite or bark. And the chickens, I don't think will get too mad at us. I know Ayumi had a question related to, a technical question, Mike, on how do you match the angles and skews with your aerials with your CAD drawings? Use Photoshop, or how do you do that?
So again, this comes back to sort of that workflow diagram where there are multiple ways to accomplish that. Both Rhino and 3ds Max have built-in tools for perspective matching, which is how you accomplish something like, where am I? Like these, where I have just photography that we took on the job site, and I built these models and then used the perspective matching in Rhino to get it to fit where it needed to, which is really, really easy to do if you're doing like interior design and you're trying to get a table to match the perspective of a picture of your living room. But a photo like this is pretty tricky. There's no straight lines to really use to create the perspective. So you have to use your imagination a little bit, which for me comes from the all-nighters in architecture school and undergrad, having to hand draw perspective drawings using a drafting table and rulers. For things like this, trying to think of my workflow here, is I will pick 2 points on the map that I can scale everything to. And for those proficient enough in Illustrator to know what a clipping mask is I will draw a clipping mask over my line work. Like let's say I'm grabbing from, I'm going to draw a little fake clipping mask. Like I'll grab this extent of that bridge to, I don't know what's another good spot. Let's say the end of this curve. I'll clip on everything under that, which it'll be, say my artwork's over there. Then I can drag it to those spots and then scale it to fit and then I'll release the clipping mask. That probably won't make sense to everybody, but that's
Probably does too at AUME. She's done that a few times, I bet.
yeah, that's my trick.
Other questions for Mike? Graphics, proposals, anything else? Any other tips and tricks that you use? I know Rick's on. There's a few other 3D, 2D folks on here. Anything else?
No, and to those people I say, if I said something in this presentation that's a different way of doing things than you, I love hearing how other people accomplish stuff. I truly believe that at least the graphic communication world is a community, and that we all get smarter by communicating with each other and growing that way. That's my soapbox. I didn't communicate that very well, but
all good. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions.
Hey, Mike.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a quick question for you, and I asked this to Angie earlier. When you do your stuff, when I used to do that stuff for Kiewit, every once in a while, like if I was doing a big map or something with an inset piece or whatever, on occasion I would put in like a bogus city or something where my in-laws were from or something like that. Or if it was like a transportation deal where you were showing change of lanes or something, I would put in like a famous person driving the bus or something like that. Do you ever do anything like that?
Oh yeah. I do that pretty much all the time. So thanks for calling.
So now
me.
I have to go back and look, Mike, on what you've been doing.
I used to put the marshmallow puff guy from Ghostbusters into renderings. Not at his like 600-foot height from the movie, but just in with the people. It started in architecture school where we built physical 2-scale models of buildings, and all of my people in the building would be little laser cutouts of the Beatles from the Abbey Road album cover, stuff like that.
Well, I'll have to look at your stuff, Mike, and see what you've been doing.
Sometimes I put the actual project team in renderings.
Go ahead.
Pretty recently, we were working on a creek project, and one of the project team liked to fly fish in that creek, so I put them in some of the renderings, stuff like that.
That's awesome. I don't think he realized that, Mike.
So I told him,
Oh, you did?
but he was a little speck.
Yeah, he was. Well, he was now. Who knows what he's going to be when they
Yeah.
start using it in PI.
Yep.
Last question from David. What's your advice on positioning aerial photos? Is north always to the left, or what does that look like on how do you position?
I, especially as, I guess, a creative director, north points north, and you need a very good reason to have an exception to that rule. One exception is if the client drawings are oriented a certain direction to match the way that the client is using their drawings. For instance, those CDOT drawings, I think north is at like a diagonal here, but we matched their directionality. The only other exception that I will sneak into proposals is She struggling to operate PowerPoint with the Zoom meeting stuff all over my screen. That's not the right page. Is if it's sometimes it just comes down to layout on a project, especially in print media. Like this, for instance, is such a jam-packed 11 by 17, and this project has sort of this wonky dog leg to it where if you north is going right here, if you change the orientation of this where north is up, one, it would be sort of difficult to fit on this page with all this content, but two, I'm using the long edge of the page to maximize the scale of this drawing. What I mean by that is if you turned it on its side so that north was up, you would lose that length and your drawing would be smaller. Or you'd have to chop it up. So there are exceptions to the rule, but north goes up.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. Anything else before we say goodbye to Mike this Friday afternoon and to the rest of you still hanging out with us? Talking proposals and graphics? No? Okay. Well, thank you all. Glad you were able to join us this Friday. Again, next month, we'll be talking cover letters, executive summaries. I put Mike's information in the chat. I put his email in there along with mine as well. So if you need to get a hold of either of us, that's how you find us. Otherwise, yeah, you can obviously find both of us also on LinkedIn. So thank you. Stay warm. Get through the rest of February. And before we know it, we'll be talking again in March. So thank you all. I'll stick around for a few minutes in case anybody else has questions. Otherwise, have a good Friday and see you all next month.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Angie.
Of course. Thank you, Mike.